Hi folks, welcome to another installment of our Bates Botanical Bootcamp webinar series. Today we're going to be going over an introduction to soil and mulching, so therefore why don't we just start from the bottom up with soils. One of the first things you're really going to consider with soils obviously is that there's going to be different types of soils for different situations, and really ultimately what you're going to need to be considering the most is what your plant needs. And if you're planting, what that really initially entails is where you're going to be planting. If you're planting containers and planters and things like that, it's good to use potting mixes that are real loose and drain really well. We have this Proganix series that you may have seen if you've ever been here with indoor and outdoor mixes. The indoor mix is really good because it's light and fluffy and holds a lot of moisture for a lot of those really often less humid indoor environments, especially in the winter time when you got your heat on. The Proganix outdoor mix is a little more heavy and gives a lot more structure for those outdoor plantings that, even though you still have it in a pot, it still needs some structure because often you might use shrubs or small trees, but it also contains a lot of shale gravel to still help with drainage, which is really an important factor for your soils in general, especially you're considering if you're planting in the ground or in garden beds. What you're ultimately going to be seeking out is a good topsoil. So we even sell this garden blend here as a good topsoil blend mix. It's not just regular sifted topsoil. It's going to have a lot in there, a lot of food, a lot of things that help it drain again, because that's really going to be one of the main factors you got to think about is drainage, because really not a lot of plants can handle sitting in water very long. Really the reason is when they sit in water, they don't have the opportunity to breathe in between waterings as much as they often need, because there's very few plants that will handle that kind of level of water. There are things like trees such as bald cypress and dawn redwood, more shrub things like itea or sweet spire. Different types of willows could be either shrubs or trees. Those can handle a lot of water, but plants like that are generally few and far in between. So it's good to give the roots an opportunity to breathe. And also in times of drought, roots will often have to grow and reach out in order to find more water sources. So that's actually good for your plant growth as well. So it's really important to make sure you have good drainage in your soil. Another good mix we even sell here is this landscape soil conditioner. It's really good because it has a lot of pine fines that are good for drainage, and contains a lot of food as well. And then ultimately, what's something you would often use this for is you might use it in your initial plantings during your planting seasons, along with garden soil mix, but a lot of times it's really just a good soil amendment. And amendments, what we're going to talk about next, is instead of just having to replace all your soil anytime you need to do something, it's good to just throw something in there that you can mix in and fix your problems, namely drainage, because something like our landscape mix has a lot of drainage in it. It's good to mix in to break up a lot of clay, which, for a lot of people, I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of heavy clay in our area. Even still, if you're only going for drainage, you can use something like pine fines here. They provide, a little bit of stuff to break up clay, as well as shale gravel. We sell that as well in our
Justin, can you move that back over one more time?
Sure thing. Yeah, so it's a good light texture. It ultimately will break down over time, but it does help provide some drainage in there. The other good thing about the landscape mix, because it has some food and some compost in there, I think it's really one of our best products. It uses a little bit of everything else we sell almost. We have this magic mushroom compost, which is a real concentrated kind of mushroom grower with manure and everything. We throw that in there. Earthworm castings are another thing people like to use for food in the ground. Our supernatural compost is an organic compost that has a lot of those as well, and it's really good for feeding the ground and top dressing. And one of the things with amendment is really, especially if you have a lot of people are dealing with a situation where they're digging up an old plant that's established, and for however many years that plant's been there, it's been sucking up a lot of those nutrients in the ground. So you're going to want to amend the soil in order to fix more food in the ground. So the compost can be used for that, but the landscape mix is something we use just an all-around, just good for fixing drainage and feeding the ground. And it's important to remember too, when you're doing these mixes, you still want to retain about usually around at least 50 to 70% of that native soil that you already have, especially for those larger plants, because they're going to be ultimately rooting out and seeking out water throughout the ground it's in. So it's good to get it used to that ground it's naturally going to be rooting into. So that's really important for that. Another thing to consider for your soils is time of year. I know we recently released a little calendar for use of our EarthMix products that can kind of help you have a little guide. You know, up here we have our garden and landscape mixes, which, you know, here we kind of reference a lot for installation, for filling raised beds. It's, you know, kind of shows you here going through all the kind of planting and growing season. And really, you know, depending on how the weather goes, we've had a very mild winter, even though we have, you know, January and February kind of in December blocked out here for the winter time. It can also be used in the wintertime when we have these mild winters because it's essentially like an extension of fall. And unless you're planting something that's really kind of marginal in our area for wintertime, you know, just more of the other standard plants that handle winter just fine, it's good to still go ahead and get them in the ground now, because unless we have a few weeks of real harsh, cold, freezing weather, you don't have to worry about the ground freezing. It will maintain a good temperature that will help insulate the roots. But that's a good thing to remember for the time of year. You know, obviously potting mixes can pretty much be done year round. You know, again, what I mentioned here with compost, it's good to go ahead and mix it in before, especially before spring season when the growing season is going to kick off. And you'll see here, and we'll talk a little more about this later, using in the top dress later during the growing season. You know, we have a few things here. Sustains, this coconut coir we sell that's a substitute for peat moss that really, really works well for retaining moisture, especially in indoor mixes. Enlighten is something we have, that's what I mentioned earlier with shale gravel. It's really good for breaking up a lot of clay, and pine fines as well was something I mentioned. But yeah, as far as, you know, mixing in and top dressing with your compost, it's good to doing that during your growing season because, you know, especially with older plants, again, you can just throw out a little top layer dressing of some compost and help feed the ground a little bit more during the growing season. And really too, when you're amending your soil, it's really good to do it again during those kind of cooler seasons, because you might be spending a lot of your summer just keeping up with what you already have, you know, making sure things stay watered and fed. It could take up a lot of your time, but you essentially want to get everything ready. Just into, if you're amending, say, where you might have, you know, just really needing to fix the drainage around some certain plants that just aren't handling very well, it's good to wait till those cooler months, because, you know, if you have to dig those plants up to amend that soil, you're much less likely to shock the plants when you dig them up during that colder weather, because they're going to likely be more dormant. And it's just, you know, a lot easier to deal with during that time. But it's all good to mix in. Overall, it's just really important to consider your plant's needs. That's, you know, really anything when you're doing gardening. You know, Middle Tennessee area, we just deal with a lot of clay and rock, and so amendment is just very important for that. But, you know, just making sure it's good and well drained and got plenty of food in there, which can also be done through fertilizing as well. But just, that's going to help promote good, healthy plant growth and a good soil structure for it to grow into. And I believe that's all we really have here for kind of introduction to soil. So we'll move on to the next level, which is mulching. And really, there's not a whole lot to mulching in general. We get a lot of questions about mulching, but for the most part, the almost number one goal is aesthetics. You're essentially creating a ground level backdrop that's going to be what your plant sits against. So what it looks like, how you make that plant pop out or really go with the landscape you're creating. And so different types of mulches can give you different colors and different textures, you know. For example, here we have two different ones we commonly sell: brown hardwood mulch and black hardwood. You know, give you obviously that natural brown or black color, but to give you that kind of natural, just rough, coarse texture. It's pretty popular. Other ones that give you a little bit more of something unique might be like shredded pine mulch here. You get, you know, mixtures of different sizes of bark and little pine shreds. Cedar chip mulch is pretty popular as well for a, you know, kind of a more unique reddish color, and they kind of orient a little bit flatter, so you get, you know, that kind of look. You could even use your pine fines as a mulch. Some people like to do that. Sorry about that.
New mic problems.
Even here, you know, some people obviously will use pine straw. Some people like that kind of light, fluffy look you get from pine straw. You know, I don't see it used that much around here. You know, me being from Middle Georgia, it's practically free wherever you are down there, so that's almost exclusively used down there. But pine straw is another thing, especially once it's more freshly harvested, has a little bit of a brighter, lively color to it. Even in more unique situations, you may have seen in like rubber mulches, but that's probably more, situations like, children's playgrounds, or there's even glass mulches out there provide, a unique look. You might find that more common in a lot more drier, arid climates. But that's something you can do. And when you're mulching, some people will, layer up mulch pretty high, but you really don't need to. A good inch or two when you're first installing some mulch is just fine. You can get and spread it around, and different later times in the year, say if like your cedar chips are kind of losing their color, you can top dress them with just enough to cover it up, and then just to keep that color looking good.
Justin, we have a question from Wendy.
All right.
Do mulches affect the pH of the soil?
There are a belief that some, like certain pine mulches and cedar chip, can be a little bit more acidic, but I haven't heard of it really affecting it too much. I don't think they really retain so much in there that they can do that to a great degree. I don't think it's generally too much of a problem to really worry about. But you'd have to imagine it had to do it a little bit, but I don't think it's any number that's really going to seep down into the soil the way a specific like soil acidifier or garden lime would do.
I tend to, just from my experience, around my berry beds where I know I have like blueberries and stuff that really love acidic soil, I just go ahead and match a mulch to that just for my peace of mind.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it couldn't hurt. I feel like where needles drop around trees in the wild, that can kind of create a more loamy, acidic environment. For sure,
absolutely. Like I said, I'm definitely not ruling out the idea of how much it can do. And like you mentioned, peace of mind. It's something that's probably not talked about a lot, but peace of mind is really important when it comes to gardening. A lot of people get too anxious about something they may be doing, and a lot of times you can maybe work plants a little too much in certain ways. So whatever you can do to kind of help, provoke, that throws in a little bit of acidity there, and it kind of helps with those plants. So that's definitely a good thing to do, and you definitely wouldn't hurt to do it. But other than that, really one of the other main things for mulching is weed suppression during the springtime, especially. You could mulch during the winter and make sure you get a good mulch layer on, so that in the coming spring, it just really slows down the progress of those weeds that are just going to be so active. We have such hot and humid weather here in Tennessee that, every year you're going to deal with weeds no matter what. And, again, being that it suppresses weeds, that's definitely not something that's going to completely solve your weed problem. You're going to have weeds coming up, especially once you start getting closer to the mid to late summer. But what this will do is give you a big head start on controlling them. So that's always good to think about. And, again, you can always top dress when you have a little discoloration, but over time, mulches tend to erode or break down. So what you want to do eventually is probably replace all that. It's good. Some people will just keep piling on with their mulch, but a lot of times it's really just to be good to go through and, pull out everything you got and just start over. Maybe even, depending on which kind of mulch you have, once a year is even a good strategy for that. A few other things to consider when mulching. A lot of people see a lot of old trees where people have mulched, and one thing that's really important to take into consideration with shrubs and trees is you really don't want to build mulch up against the trunk. That can really trap in a lot of moisture and possibly rot the plant, especially for younger ones. So you want to definitely keep mulch separated from plants themselves and make sure there's not just excess water piling up under that mulch that can rot it. And another thing to consider, this kind of goes back to when we're talking about pine straw and how, me being from Middle Georgia, it's practically free because there's so many pine trees. And that just kind of shows you there's always unique ways you can mulch by using your natural surroundings. Obviously pines or something with the straw and even their pine cones. A lot of people just like to pick them up, but you could even just throw them back on that little mulch bed around the tree. And even a lot of people really love those good southern magnolias, but people with smaller yards, they really just hate dealing with all that leaf drop throughout the year. So we often mention as a fix for that, if you like the look, you could even just get a rake or a leaf blower and just blow them right back under the tree and build up a little mulch bed made out of the leaves and everything. If that's a look that favors you, that's always, kind of cost-effective and even really labor-effective way to deal with all that chaff that comes off a lot of plants.
Robert has a question for weed control. Do you have an opinion on using cardboard or fabric underneath the mulch?
That's, again, essentially what you're trying to do there is essentially the same thing you're doing with the mulches. You're suppressing it so it has, a longer path to kind of get through. You do want to make sure whatever you're planting down under that mulch is going to be able to soak up enough water to allow any other water that comes through, rain or just waterings to get into that cohesion with all the water that's soaked in, so that's going to soak right through. What you don't want to run into is sometimes with certain weed barriers that are a little too, or just not porous enough, and so you can have a lot of runoff. So you definitely want to make sure whatever you're putting under there is going to be able to soak up that water and let it seep down into the ground still, because getting too much runoff, you're just going to probably wash a lot of your mulch away anyway. But
I've observed the depth that you mulch to is pretty important as well. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to have a certain amount of depth, because if you don't mulch enough, it seems like from my experience, you'll still get prevailing weeds, but you might, like, if you mulch to a certain level, the root structures are weaker, so they're easier to pull out. But, like, do you have any experience with, like, what stops them entirely, or do you think it's not just mulch, but it's a barrier? It is actively picking, because birds, poop in the mulch too, and that sprouts seeds. Yeah,
and like I said, ultimately, when it comes down to it, weeds are just always going to be a problem. There's nothing I can really think of that's going to outright just solve your problem at the beginning of the year. It's just something you have to learn how to work with over time, and that's the advantage of mulching, like you said, just to help slow them down and just really give you a head start, so you're not just overwhelmed by the time late spring rolls around. At the end of the day too, like, nothing's really going to be quite as effective as plucking them right out by the roots. But again, like you said, not only with birds pooping on your beds, but they could even carry seeds and everything else that will promote more weed growth. So a lot of times too, it's also just the environment where you're in. If you're in full sun or somewhere where they can reach a lot of sunlight and just grow faster, in the shade, it might be a little easier to manage as well. It's just really always a fight, but mulching gives you an advantage of just really suppressing that in the kind of beginning of the growing season, and giving you a little head start into the summer, so you can help keep it managed a lot easier. And I do believe that's pretty much what I have for mulching as well. Like I said, it's not too complex when it comes to mulching. It's mostly a visual thing, and then the weed suppression is a real added bonus. But
for some of the folks that joined in later, would you mind going over the EarthMix varieties that we carry?
Yeah, might as well get this little calendar out again, since I list them.
Let me go put it back up on the screen.
You just let me know when you get it up there.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay.
We're not super zoomed into it, but it's there.
All right. I'll just point them out here too. Up top we have the garden topsoil blend and our landscape soil conditioner mix. These are good for installation, and also, again, like I mentioned earlier, this soil conditioner is really good for amendment if you're fixing drainage and putting nutrients back into the soil, especially after digging up an old established plant. We have our Proganix outdoor and indoor potting mixes. Again, I mentioned the indoor mix is a good light fluffy mix for your indoor plants, and dealing with a lot of that dryness you often get in your home, especially during the winter. They can retain a lot more moisture. The outdoor mix is a little more structurally sound because a lot of times people are, with their outdoor containers, are often pretty big. They plant shrubs or trees in there, so it gives a little more sturdy soil to plant into, while also it has some shale gravel in there that can help with drainage to make sure it's not just sopping wet all the time. We have our Supernatural Magic Mushroom Compost. The Supernatural is just a kind of a blend of different mulches and everything. It's organic. It's all organic. Our mushroom compost uses a lot of manure from mushroom growers as well. It's good food. Viragra is the next thing on here, is our Earthworm Castings. These are all three good composts, and just really good for, again, amending your soil if you need to replenish the food, or even top dressing during the growing season, like it shows on here, May through August, or June through August. During your growing season, that's good to help keeping some food on the plants and keeping them healthy.
Yeah, Magic is actually a really fluffy compost that's really good in raised beds. I mean, my raised bed soil is so light. when using that combined with a little bit of garden and a little bit of supernatural.
Mm-hmm. And even like you mentioned how fluffy it is, I mean, that could also, you could really get pretty liberal with it too, because if it's not going to hold too much moisture with that fluffiness, that's a good thing to think about with these. That you can really just juice up your beds with that.
Maybe Honora, who's here with us, can speak a little bit more to the organic certification. I think we are working towards one of the certification organizations that are on the West Coast. I think we're getting our applications in for that. But as far as our sourcing and what we put in, yes, it's 100% organic. And that's on our end. Okay, and then Lois has a question. I was told at Bates my rhododendron probably needed better drainage. How best can I get conditioning materials under it without digging it out?
Yeah, so that's, again, why I mentioned earlier that amendment is really good to do during these colder months, because even if you're not going to dig it all the way out, you might be digging around the roots a lot. And so during these colder months, while the plants are more dormant and not active, you're much less likely to shock them by exposing the roots and everything. So, and if you're going to do that, you can just kind of find around, you could start, right by the edges of where the leaves kind of come out, because that's kind of what you call the drip line too. But the roots often mimic the top of the plant and how far they spread out. So that's kind of a baseline where you could sort of gather where the edges of the roots are. So you can start maybe digging up around that, try not to expose the roots too much, maybe dig around under the plant and try to get a lot of the area around it, maybe a good foot or so around there, and dig a lot of that soil up. Again, we definitely really recommend this landscape mix a lot for drainage and also throwing a little more food. But again, you can use some pine fines or shale gravel, and especially when it comes to if you're using this soil conditioner mix, again, you do want to retain a lot of that native soil. I'd say probably go up to like at least 50% or so of the soil conditioner mixed with that native soil you're digging up, because you do want to retain some of that as that plant's going to grow into the ground you have there. So you do need it to get used to that kind of soil. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Mark here. Starting new raised bed for vegetables and herbs this year. It's 20 inches deep. What do you recommend for filling raised beds?
Yeah, again, an easy one would be that garden mix. It's just a really good topsoil blend to just kind of structurally plant everything into. You can mix in, again, like Tyler mentioned, he likes to use this magic mushroom compost because it's so fluffy and provides a whole lot of food.
It's a really good lightener for raised beds, and the lighter the soil is, I feel like for a raised bed, the deeper the roots can grow, easy access to moisture.
Yeah, again, that goes to just giving those roots a chance to breathe and to reach out for water in between waterings, so that the plants can grow and be healthy. But yeah, essentially that's really good for raised beds. Again, this landscape mix is good to mix in. A little bit of supernatural compost will be good to do. A lot of people do like earthworm castings, like this Viagra mix.
Some of our mixings do have these components in it. Like I believe landscape has pine fines, and then earthworm castings, I believe, are in our garden blend, as well as our Proganix outdoor, perhaps.
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, that's why we promote our own mixes. Really, is because it's not just a nice fluffy topsoil for you. It's also got a lot of nutrient in there to give you a good kickstart when you're installing plants. Yeah, that's really, I think, a good little introduction for your new raised beds.
If anybody has any other questions, feel free to chat them out. We'll go ahead and stick around for another minute or two. Just want to go ahead and let y'all know about some webinars on the horizon.
It was February 8th. We have Rain Gardens, that's correct?
Rain Gardens with Terry Kevlin. She's going to PowerPoint us through recommended plants and practices for making an effective rain garden, so stick around for that one.
I believe I heard too, isn't Carrie doing one on container plants, I think, next week?
Carrie's doing one on how to select containers.
Okay.
Let me double check the calendar. Yeah, how to choose the right pot or container. So that's going to be an informative one, and that's February 12th. And then disease and treatment products is in between the both of those on February 10th with Ben Trest. That's another handy one to check out.
Definitely.
We also have a newsletter where you can sign up, and we'll give you a monthly update of what's on the radar. And right now we're webinared up all the way out to March. I'm not really seeing any other questions here, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today.
Yeah, thank you so much. In conclusion, overall, again, the big factor is drainage, amending for fixing drainage and nutrients in your soil. And for the mulching, it's mostly just a visual thing, that kind of backdrop that your plants are going to be sitting on. And a little bit of advantage too is that weed suppression to help you fight that throughout the year. Gives you a much bigger advantage. But that's pretty much going to be our introduction to soil and mulching. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll look forward to everybody joining us for the next one.